morning. Can I have
My grandmother on one side had a Catholic sister. Or Jew.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to welcome you here, our distinguished guests, students and parishioners, and members of our Brisbane community. Just a little bit of housekeeping. The facilities for ladies and gents are just up the stairs to your left, if you haven't found it. If we have to evacuate in an emergency, if you go out the door to your left, and we'll go around the building up to the grassed area. I'm suggesting that way because it's all flat rather than running up the stairs. The other thing I want to mention, if anyone would like to stay for the Australian blanket exercise and you haven't registered, you could do that over morning tea. And the person you need to see is Emma, and that's Emma up there. That's not looking at us. She's busily working, so she's the one to see. So we'll start the proceedings this morning. And I'll invite Shannon Rusker to conduct the Welcome to Country.
How is everyone this morning? How is everyone this morning? That's better. My name's Shannon Rusker. I've been asked to give you a Welcome to Country. For those that don't know what a Welcome to Country is, it's not something that event organisations or the Aboriginal people started. They sat down at the pub or whatever and said, we should start this new thing called Welcome to Country. Something our mob's been doing since the beginning of time. There's over 500 different Aboriginal speaking nations across Australia, even more that isn't recorded on paper, and I know some of the dialects that aren't recorded on paper taught to me by some of the elders around southeast Queensland, which is a great honour. I come from the Yagara people of Brisbane City and surrounds. About Caboolture River and Pine River is an overlapping sort of area between the Kabi Kabi, which I'm also from, and the Turrbal Yagara people, goes down to the Logan River. So anyone residing down near Logan there, the Logan River, once we go over the river, it's a different country altogether, called the Yugambeh. And the Yugambeh, I've also got bloodlines to the Combameri of Surface Paradise. And then my wife is the neighbours, which are the Waka Waka people. They have a large area which goes up through Sanford Valley. Anyone know where that is, Sanford Valley? Yeah. Sanford Valley, Sherburne, Kingaroy, Nanango, Mergen, Gayndah, right up to Idesvale. So it's a huge country they got. And then, have I missed any? Quandamuka, where I come from this morning, where I live. So I live over at Stradbroke Island, and there is some of you may have heard of Ujiru Nunako. And Ujiru was Kath Rusker. She married Uncle Bruce Walker. Uncle Bruce Walker was a crack boxer too, so he used to go around Australia. He was part of the Walkers and the Kubel family. And that's my grandmother's sister. So my grandmother was Florence Rusker. She was the oldest one out of them. And they're the Nunako people of North Stradbroke Island. So I've got connection more or less in the Great Southeast. The country there starts around Tungalpa Creek, Capalaba, around that sort of area, and their country goes right up into Moreton Island, down to, South Stradbroke was joined to the Spit not so long ago, in the 1900s, so the Combameri and Gorompal were the sort of tribes that it linked up and went further north. My great-grandfather, who was a messenger man, and I'll say this because messenger men were part of the Welcome to Country itself. So a Welcome to Country that you see with the spoken part is only a snippet of what it really is. The first method that we would use is my grandfather Morgan, or Charlie Morton, who became the first sworn-in Aboriginal mayor probably in the country. and that was the mayor of Baramba. And grandfather Charlie Morton Mookin was the messenger man, so he would travel with these sticks. And these sticks had paintings or carvings on. And it gave the other countries reason why we were travelling from one country to another. Once he went over by himself, can you hear me? Once he went over by himself, so Logan River to the south, for example, he'd meet at the Logan River, light the smoke signal of the mountain close by, then he'd go down by the river, wait for their messenger man to come across. Their messenger man comes down to the river, and he reads the stick, he says, I've got to take it to one of the elders and make sure, and gives a reason why we're going there. When he goes into their country, the elder will say yes or no, you can come in. They might be in sorry business. There might be funerals, and they might say, come back in a couple of weeks, so and so just pass on, we're not ready. And they'll say, come on over. So if they say, come on over, he comes back to the tribe, and he says, pack your bags, come on, we're going over. Can you hear me without the microphone? Yeah. Cool. Pack your bags, come on, we're going over. So we all pack our bags and we head on down towards Logan, and then the mob there, once we arrive, they will welcome us in. They'll have a spokesperson that welcomes us in. After that is usually the smoking ceremony. So, you know, you see a smoking ceremony being conducted, similar to your church as well. So it's about not bringing in a bad spirit from the other country and making sure that when you're coming in, that it's all peaceful and ready to go. After that is a spokesperson. So the spokesperson is what you see at every event across Australia. You're right, mate. Every event, you've got to change that. Oh, yeah, another one. Check. I was actually going to the video. Oh. Check. So the spokesperson gets out and he or she does a welcome to country. So that's what you see at stadiums. That's what you're seeing now. That's what you'll see all over. After the welcome to country is done, then the smoking ceremony, and then we will go hunting for the day. We'll allocate areas. So for Brisbane City, for example, where my clan occupied the central area until they were shifted out in in the early times. They were shifted out of town. A boundary was set up, not the boundary road you know of at Musgrave Park, but the boundary at Breakfast Creek. So our mob was shifted to Breakfast Creek. It wasn't until later that we ended up there. But we ended up there, and when we would invite all the people, we would do the hunting, and Cooperoo was for the eastern clans. They were able to hunt and live around, set up huts and that while they stayed for a while. The Cubby, the Bribey Island and the Fraser Island mobs, northern mobs more or less, they were up near Lucky Buggers, the Normanby Hotel, huh? Got a good feed and all that. Anyway, you go down to Kirill Park, so around Musgrave Park is where the Waka Waka, Ipswich, which is the Western Yagara Yugurapals, and then sort of the Western clans would occupy that area. And hence why you still see a large population in that area today, around the West End. And then Logan would join up with the Cooperoo tribes as well. And so they allocated those areas to be able to hunt and have a feast. The feasting would happen all together, and we would bring bits and pieces and give gifts to one another in that sort of celebration. And the song and dance would be done as the bonfires were lit. And on that note, I'll share a song with you. I usually get people up to dance, and I can't boogie much anymore, my back's right. But I'll get you to clap along, eh? Yeah. So if you clap along, I'll sing this song that'll resonate to all our people. This song is called Going in an Army, and Going in an Army is, has a few different interpretations. It was sung in the Cubby language, and it was also shared with Waka Waka. So Cubby and Waka Waka own the ownership. Believed to be a man called Bubijin Kopo was the author of this song, or the songwriter. And he gave it to his son-in-law, who was a famous singer. And when the tribes would gather at the different places, they would actually request this singer to get up and sing. He was that good. His name was Grandfather Fred Embry. and Alfred Embry, grandfather William Mackenzie, and my grandmother Janie Sunflower, also known as Janie Morton. Well, she married Uncle Sonny Sunflower from Rockhampton, and she was a singer as well that went around, and they were requested to sing at all these different celebrations. So when he gave the song, it actually resonated to all the tribes, and it went as far as South Australia, so just by song lines. So mob down there even sing this song, and it originated from just next door, the country's there. Yo garinga na nami ang malala. Nanya ba me nanya waka waka kabi kabi yagra toro bongoro yo yo. Clap along. Garinga na nami gadya mo berana. Garinga na nami garinga na nami gadya mo birono. Garinga na nami gadya mo birono. Karing dan me gayam mo birono kayan man marenge gabon gon ganyong kayan man marenge gabon gon ganyong kayan man marenge gabon gon ganyong karing dan me gayam mo birono karing dan me gayam mo birono. So that's a welcoming song. A welcoming song that if you ask most of the Aboriginal people that reside around the area, if you know Garing in an Army is like a national song, I suppose, for us, that it's a national anthem. Even when we're away overseas, we hear that, we know we're coming home. It's a calling of home. I'd like to thank you for having me here to explain what a welcoming country is in our terms. I only speak from the Yagara Turrbal perspective. Many tribes have their own different welcoming countries of how they deliver it, and I've got no authority in that area to tell them how to do it. But everyone is unique. Each family has a unique way of doing it, and there's no right way and there's no wrong way. So please don't think that there's only one set way to do a welcome to country. Ask the tribe this. When you go into the different areas in Australia, it's quite simple. Ask them, how did your family travel from one country to another? As I mentioned, we had a message stick, which was like a visa passport. Then ask them this: how did your tribe accept visitors coming into your country? And that's where your welcome to country will begin. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Good on you, Shannon.
Now, could everyone turn off their mobile phones or put them on silent? And I'll invite the speakers to come on stage.
I know, but I need the exercise.
Cynthia says I'm showing off.
I'll sit. Yeah. I think that's what you wanted me to do. I'm all right. Thank you. Do you have a question?
We intended Thelma to sit on the grey chair, but Alfredo has. And we have Connor. Hola, Connor. How are you? Have you got sound?
Can you hear, Connor?
I do.
Can you hear? Can you understand the Australian accent?
Absolutely.
Oh, praise the Lord. Well, welcome everybody. As we come to this latest session in the Laurel Blow series, I don't think I need to introduce Laurel Blow to you. She was a remarkable figure, not least in Brisbane Catholic education, and hence this series of speakers bears her name. So we think with great gratitude of a woman like Laurel Blow. Now, we have with us 3 speakers today. We've decided that one is not enough, So let me just very briefly introduce the speakers, and then I'll say a quick word about the structure of the session. On my left, my far left, we have someone who really needs, I imagine, not much introduction at all to the people who are here, Thelma Parker. At the moment, Thelma is a senior manager of the Community Truth-Telling Program, and this is really at the heart of what we're focusing upon here this morning, truth-telling. So Thelma is Senior Manager of the Community Truth-Telling Program in Reconciliation Australia. Now that is, at this time, a very significant position. But Thelma has been many other things, or is many other things. He comes from the traditional owners, Walla Walla and the Waka Yujuru and the Waka Moona peoples. And she was raised on country and lived her early years in bush camps around Kalkadoon and Walla Walla country. She's worked for Catholic Education for a very long time, 25 years. Held various leadership positions, manager Indigenous education up in Townsville, senior lecturer here at ACU, head of school, Edmund Rice Flexible Learning School, senior education officer, Edmund Rice Education Australia. I'm breathless. Thelma was also the previous chairperson of NATSIC, and she held that position, it's a pretty challenging position too, for 9 years, and worked closely with the Bishops' Conference, so she's survived the Bishops too, not bad. Thelma has formidable qualifications academically. She has a Master's in Education Leadership, Indigenous Leadership, and Diploma in Theology. Both of these qualifications attained at this university. And in her current role as with the Truth-Telling Program of Reconciliation Australia, Thelma seeks to develop and deliver a truth-telling program to community organisations and local governments with a wrap across Australia. So Thelma, it's great to have you with us, really. On the screen, we have Connor Sarazin, whom I've welcomed. Connor is in Canada, and there he holds the position of Kairos Blanket Exercise Communications and Partnerships Coordinator. How's that for a mouthful? Connor's a member of the Algonquins of Pigwakangan First Nation, and has worked with First Nation chiefs, councils, staff and so on to assist with building capacity, employment and training within their communities. Throughout his career, Connor has been employed in the non-profit and private sectors for corporations and Indigenous businesses in various areas from sales, employment and training to tourism, graphic design and marketing. He's also formally trained in graphic communications from Cannabel College, and is also known for his passion as an Algonquin Mohawk artist who has led several art shows across Ontario. So this is a man of formidable talent. Another passion Connor holds close to his heart is his determination to reclaim his culture and to honour the sacrifices his grandparents made. They fled their home and family and community, lived off the land in hiding in order to save their own children from being taken away to residential schools. Connor is grateful to be part of a movement to bring awareness and understanding of his ancestors to light not only in Canada but far beyond. So we are delighted to have you with us, Connor, albeit online. Finally, we have Alfredo Barahona, and he has the title of the Kairos Blanket Exercise Global Newcomer Coordinator, and he's based in Toronto, or as the Canadians tend to say, Toronto. But he wasn't born in Canada, you can tell. He was born in El Salvador, but it wasn't known as El Salvador forever, that's for sure. Originally he's from Cuscatlan, a minor people territory, part of what's now known as El Salvador. and moved to Canada as a refugee in the mid-80s when he was just a boy, by the look of him. He's worked with refugee and migrant communities through Toronto-based settlement agencies and now with Kairos Canadian Ecumenical Justice Initiatives. At the moment, Alfredo is working on Indigenous rights issues, focusing on the development of meaningful relationships and solidarity between Indigenous peoples and newcomers to Canada. This is of interest to us as a country that has many newcomers as well as our own Indigenous peoples. He's facilitated the Kairos blanket exercise extensively in both English and Spanish through all of Canada, and has trained facilitators for the blanket exercise, and he's responsible for the international work related to the Kairos blanket exercise. Facilitating the effective and meaningful participation of affected communities in advocacy and solidarity work is a key principle in all that Alfredo does. As a tool for social change, music within a faith, ecumenical and solidarity context is an integral part of Alfredo's life and social justice work. So in Connor we have an artist, in Alfredo we have a musician. So welcome Alfredo, bienvenido. So there they are now. What we're going to do is that each of our three guests is going to speak for about 10 minutes. 10 minutes is a figure of speech. Well, within reason. And we are going to go CAT. Connor, you're first. I hope you're ready. And then we're going to hear Alfredo. And then we decided that the last word should go to the lady. So we'll hear Thelma. And we'll also see images that Thelma has brought with her to accompany her words. And then once the three speakers have spoken, we will open it up for questions, so there'll be a Q&A. And at the appropriate moment, I'll draw a close to that, and we will rush off to that most sacred of events, morning tea. So, without further ado, and certainly no more words from me, Connor, I'm going to invite you to speak to us for about 10 minutes. Over to you.
Miigwech, Kwe, Minopi Majuin, Joshin. Ninwin Awinin, Natawada, Tibedat, Connor Nindijnakas, Pikwak Nagan, Nindojaba. Makwa Nadodam, Omawa Winini, Nini Nadao. Hello, good morning, and welcome to everyone today. My spirit name, roughly translated, is He Who Listens to the Darkness, and my colonial name is Connor. I come from Pikwakanagan First Nation, and Pikwakanagan just means Golden Lake, and I am of the Bear Clan. I am from the peoples known as the Downriver people. And I am on my traditional, unceded, unsurrendered territory of the original Algonquin peoples. And I'd like to thank everyone for allowing me to join you today virtually on your traditional land. So, miigwech, thank you. So, there's a lot with Canadian history. My ancestors, we have record of my ancestors being on these lands that go back 16 generations. As mentioned, my grandparents, they did flee their home. My grandparents went to Serpent River Residential School, and both my grandfathers actually served as gunners in the Canadian Army during World War II. And they fought for this country despite the fact that, they weren't even, First Nations people weren't recognized as people under Canadian law, not until 1960. And if you recall, World War II ended in 1945, I believe it was. So in 1960, my dad was actually 18, so he was just a youngin compared to his soon-to-be 80th birthday very shortly. Um, so with the colonization, um, our history really goes back further than what the books say. Um, we have artifacts that have been found here from um, 12 and 1300 BC. So our peoples have been on these lands for many, many years. And a lot of those traditions and that knowledge of our culture was really lost when settlers came and colonized these lands. And when my grandparents left, a lot of that culture and those traditions were lost. My dad barely remembers being able to speak the language. And with that, I've been working really hard. It is, part of the language, part of remembering who we are, is being able to remember the language. And I know some of the elders, even within my own community, they worry about, when they do go and pass on to the other side, that they won't be able to communicate with their relatives because they've lost the language. We have in my community, we have no one left that is fluent in the language. So that's been completely lost from residential schools. The last residential school that closed in Canada was in 1996 in Saskatchewan. The residential school that closed for my community closed in 92. So if we had stayed and were raised in my community, I would have been in residential school as well. The residential school by my community that closed, I was 25. So I would have been well out of school by that time. My grandparents, especially my grandfather, used to talk about, and I didn't understand at the time, but he used to talk about the fire monster. And I never understood that because he said, you have to be good because the fire monster will come and get you. And it wasn't until actually just a few years ago that we come to realize that this fire monster was actually the furnace in the basement of the residential school. And they would bring the children there, I guess, if they misbehaved. And I guess my grandfather was one of them. A little troublemaker, I suppose. But they would take them down there and they would be threatened to be put in that furnace. Just one of the things that I remember him speaking about. And, the intergenerational trauma that comes from these things as children, as they experience, they really do play down the line. Because these children who were taken and for the most part not allowed to return home, because Serpent River is about an 8-hour drive from my community. So back in the day, even when I was a little kid, my grandparents didn't even have a car. They didn't know how to drive. So chances are they didn't go home either. So they stayed there until they, became 16 and the school pushed them out. And, that not being able to have that connection with their own parents, not having that nurturing that a child should have, was something that they weren't able to give to their own children, and something that their children weren't able to provide to their children. So the impact, of loss, loss of lands, loss of language, loss of culture, and really losing who you are. And it wasn't until my mid to late 20s where I actually acknowledged the fact, well, at the time the government called us Indians, so I didn't acknowledge the fact that I was even Indian because it was such a taboo thing to even admit. And you were very much looked down upon. So, fast forward, I'm in my 50s now and have grandchildren of my own. And, the tides have really, really turned because I no longer am ashamed of being called Indian, even though it might be taboo in the mainstream now for folks to be referred that way. But as a First Nations man, I'm proud to say that I am First Nations. I'm proud to say that although I'm not fluent in my language, I'm working on it. And I'm also working on learning my culture and learning what it means to really be me, and being empowered by that and taking back that power. And that is my truth. Miigwech, thank you.
Thank you very much, John. I think we would all recognise the deep connections between what Connor was saying and the story of our own Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, particularly that loss of identity and intergenerational trauma. So let us now pass to our other Canadian guest, who comes to, well, really from El Salvador via Canada. He's the universal man. Over to you, Alfredo.
Jimmy Wage, taxing Mark Coleridge. So Supayush, Jimmy Wage, Connor. Nahano Tugay, Alfredo, Nutsun Tugay, Barahona, Nahani Mexic, Tignitation Kuskatan. Nahani Nemi Suksuni Pagi. Nahani Nemi Suksuni Pagi. Ninoni Amuan, Ini Tunan. I just said thank you so much, Archbishop Mark Coleridge, and thank you so much to my brother Connor. I also said good morning to each and every one of you. My name is Alfredo Barahona. I was born in the territory called Cuscatan by my ancestral people, the Nahua people, the Maya Pipil. But it's also known as El Salvador. And as you heard earlier, I migrated to Canada in the 80s as a result of course, what I also relate to colonial processes of social injustice and political injustices in my country. So I had to live with my whole family and becoming a refugee in Canada. But it is a blessing in disguise, as they said. And it is a blessing that I came to that land, because then I got to meet people like Connor and others, and I understood since then that it didn't really matter where I was. There's people. There are people who also are going through their own struggles and their own challenges, just like I was and my family was. And I learned to make that connection. And it was in Canada that I had the opportunity to witness the first Mayan ceremony. So think about that. The irony that I had to leave my territory to be able to witness and participate the first Mayan ceremony. That to me is colonialism. So what Connor narrated to you, it is pretty safe to say that it's pretty much the story of many Indigenous people around the world, because we just finished last week the World Indigenous Peoples Conference on Education, and with us we had a sister from the Maya Achi people in Rabinal in Guatemala, and we had a brother from the Quitukara Nation in Ecuador, and Connor was to be here with us as well. But colonial processes do not allow us to move freely in the territory that belong to our ancestors. So we need to think about that. In listening to our sister from Rabinal in Guatemala, and also Darío from the Quitukara Nation, and their participation in what we did, the blanket exercise, the world blanket exercise, and listening to their story, not only as part of the blanket exercise, but as part of our conversations, it only confirmed to me, again, what I have already known for many, many years, and what I also heard people saying, that it is the same story, the same history of colonization, loss of language, loss of territory, loss of culture, loss of spirituality. I am learning the language too, and every time I say, Nahanutuga, Alfredo, Nahani Nemi, Susuni Pagi, Nahani Nemi, Susuni Pagi, Nemi Amuan, every time I pronounce those words, just to tell you how happy I am to be able to be with you, but to speak the language that my ancestors were denied to. So my great-grandmother, my grandmother, my mother, my great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father were not allowed to speak the language. They forgot, as Connor said, they forgot who they were. And it is an everyday struggle for all of us to remember who we are and to go back to the roots that the colonialism has tried to take away from us. But they can't. It's in our heart, it's in our blood, it's in every cell of our being, so they won't be able to. And so I share this with you because I do have the hope that we will be able to work together, Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in Australia, in Canada, in Ecuador, in Guatemala, in the Philippines, in Africa. We will be able to work together. We can do it. Yeah. We can do it. Anything that human beings have done that is wrong, we have the capacity to also turn it around and change it. There are laws, and we respect the laws. Yes, the laws were made by men and women. So the laws can be changed by men and women too. So let's do that. Let's take the time. Let's take the time that we need to do that. I wanted to be here with you and speak to you a little bit about my own experience and how it relates to the work we do with Kairos. I am the Kairos Blanket Exercise Global and Newcomer Coordinator. That means basically I help to facilitate the relationship building processes between Indigenous peoples in Canada and newcomers to Canada. But I also work with international partners, Indigenous peoples like Thelma and others, to try to work on the Kairos Blanket Exercise and build a global exercise that will represent our common history, because it is common history. You heard Connor speak about residential schools. Well, that is the Indian residential schools that were imposed in Canada that will be similar to the processes that you experience here in Australia, like the stolen generation, where children are taken away from their homes and communities to be educated, quote unquote. But that education means to be transforming people into something that they're not. That is not right. Even children will tell you that. Young children will tell you that. That is not right. That's not fair. That's what they said when we do the blanket exercise with children. That's not fair. I think we have a lot to learn together. I think we have a lot to unlearn as well. It is always an ongoing process of learning and unlearning, and we do it with everything we have. I often said, because this is what I learned from Indigenous people, you have to see with your eyes, but not only with your eyes, you have to see with your heart, and you have to listen not only with your ears, but also with your heart. And when you speak also not only with your mouth, but also with your heart. And so when you think, in my own language, in Nahuatl, in the Nahuatl language, I love it because there's not a word for thinking. It's not a word for, it's a word, the word for thinking is feeling with the heart. So it's not the mind that is doing the thinking, it's the heart that is doing the feeling. And so I love that when I learned that there's no concept or there's no word in the Nahuatl language for the word think. I fell in love with that language even more because that explained to me. That's why we said language tells us who we are and defines who we are too. So language is very important. So I commit myself also to learn as much as I can and then share it with others, and that's what we are doing. Thanks to this wonderful technology, we are able to connect, and so, miles and miles away, we're able to connect. Maybe I will start to wrap it up just by sharing a little bit with you that as we've been spending this time with brothers and sisters from all around the world, when we came to the World Indigenous Peoples Conference on Education, it became very clear to me also, once again, that truth needs to be told. If we want to speak about reconciliation, if we want to speak about resettling the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, then we have to know the truth. And what happens sometimes is that people don't know the truth. When we do the blanket exercise, I've heard comments like, how come we didn't learn this in 12 years of education, from kindergarten to before you graduate to go into university. And then you go into university and you still don't learn the history the way we should learn it from an Indigenous perspective. We learn it, but not, we don't learn the whole story. So I heard that. So we need to think about that. Think about the importance of truth-telling. Sometimes the truth will hurt, because it does hurt, but we need to own it, and we need to think about it, we need to change, and we need to build that relationship and that reconciliation, build it on knowing the truth. It's not about finger pointing, it's not about accusing anyone. That's not what I'm doing. That's not what I'm interested in doing. But I'm interested in learning the truth and hearing from others. And I know it's going to hurt me. I know that. But I'm committed to it, and I will continue to. Chimiwech, Suksupadiush.
Thank you very much indeed, Alfredo. Just listening to Alfredo's words, it struck me that truth-telling is absolutely fundamental, but so too is truth-hearing. The truth has to be spoken, but it does have to be heard. And that itself can be painful. Speaking the truth can be difficult, but hearing it, really listening to it with those ears at the heart, as you say, that can be even more difficult. The other thing that struck me listening to both Connor and Alfredo is that evil has no imagination. The patterns of devastation and destruction are uncannily similar. Wherever you look. I mean, evil's the original one-trick pony. It has no imagination, because that belongs to God. And we do need imagination as we move forward together on this path of what we call here reconciliation. Thelma, over you now with your words and your images.
Thank you, Bishop. Okay. For those people who don't know me, my name is Biljuringa. Biljuringa is my birth name. It's given to me by Gawa, which is my people, which is part of Walyawara, Wakagudgeru and Wakamana. So where is this place? It's actually on the border of Queensland and Northern Territory. We are one of many, many languages across Australia. I would like to pay my respects to Shannon this morning. Thank you, brother, for a warm welcome. I'd also like to pay my respects to Auntie Laurel with her spirits and her ancestors that still lives through us. Auntie Joan Hendricks, I can feel her spirits. Dr. Marie White, I thank all of those three wonderful, strong Aboriginal women that certainly provide the support but the way forward for me as an up-and-coming leader. I'd like to acknowledge all the First Nations peoples, uncles, aunties, leaders that are here today, and to pay respects to you and your ancestors as they hold the rightful place for your countries. I'd like to pay respects also and acknowledge family, Donna, Bailey, Laurie and Anne. To my work colleagues, to Liz, Nick and Andy, thank you very much for coming today. Thank you all for being present in this movement and time of the truth for Australia. You see, country for me is everything. It's who I am in terms of my identity as a Walyawara, Wakagudgeru, Wakamana woman. It is a part of my living system. Yes, it's in my blood, and there's no denying that. All the way through of my life, I was instrumental from a very early age of being brought up by Granny Queen, by my mother, by my uncles and aunties in a camp. We had no running water. We had no bathtub. We had no house. We had a tree and a shed. This is still in our time. And the reason being, we were on the outskirts in camps, is because the colour of our skin. My shade of skin is just like your skin. But because of the truth at that time wasn't allowed to be present like it is now. Thelma, Granny Queen, was the law woman for our country. There was no one near her. She knew the song lines, she was the doctor, she was the musician for country, she was the storyteller for us. That was handed down to my mother and to me. Knowing full fact of what I need to do now in terms of country and how country cares for me, and I, in return, need to care for country. witnessing robberies, witnessing camps. English is not my first language, but I'm able to tell the story in a Western colonial structure, knowing full fact that it's going to make sense. And as an interpreter, now, for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people to tell the truth for our people. How we tell the truth is with mob. We needed to make sure that it's part of us with country and sometimes for country. You see, it's our living systems that brings us in this space for our people. We needed to make sure from a Western structure that we needed to get it right for our country. This is now called native title. In a courtroom with a High Court judge, 4 to 5 barristers and up to 10 lawyers putting our case forward. Why is it important for us to tell the truth for our country? This gave us the stamp of approval from a Western world to say that we have stake to that country. But knowing full fact, we've always had stake in it. And knowing that we will continue to have that with or without that stamp of approval. So for me today, and providing the truth-telling process so far with the waterhole blanket, the Australian blanket exercise, we've delivered over 10,000 people in this exercise, and hopefully many more to come, and hopefully many more people will continue to tell our story in and the way that we do. Making sure that in terms of our own knowings is very critical in the factor. We have new change in Australia. We hear it, we see it on TV, we hear it, we see it on the radio. We hear it and we see it through the Archbishop, who has now come up with the other bishops to approve the Uluru Statement from the Heart. That process for us is about us owning the truth-telling for Australians' history. While we have one country, we've got two stories that need to come together as one. Last week, while we've delivered the Australian blanket exercise at the World Indigenous Conference, we also had the World Blanket exercise. And I have learnt a lot in terms of working with Connor and Alfredo and the members of our group, knowing full fact that English wasn't the first language, but we knew we had a common process of the same history, with the same First Nations people in the world. That gave us hope that gave us strength, knowing full fact on a world stage that we were able to talk openly and engage in our conversations about who we were as First Nations peoples, the original peoples in the world. Learning, unlearning, and relearning is certainly a part of Reconciliation Australia. It's about us moving from that safe space to that brave space, yeah? And we know that we can do that well, collectively, as all Australians. I'd like to say thank you to Alfredo for the friendship, and you, Connor, for allowing me to be in the space with you. And I am hoping that we could go again, working across the world and to deliver the World Blanket Exercise. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Thelma. I think before we move to the back and forth of Q&A, we might just spend a couple of minutes just in silence, because I think we've heard words which in a sense are simple, but they are deep words. And so let's just open the ears of the heart perhaps and allow what we have heard just to resonate within before we move to Q&A. So let's just enter into a silence for a time. I have often thought how quiet this land must have been before the Europeans came, which I suspect is one of the reasons why the First Nations people have a skill in silence that we struggle with. You see it in Miriam Rose, but you see it in so many Indigenous people. The silence is somehow in their DNA because it was a quiet land before the West arrived. Now, it's over to you in this moment of conversation. We have listened. Are there questions or reflections of any kind that you would like to contribute to the conversation? Eric, are you going to conduct the orchestra?
I have the roving mic, and so now's the opportunity if you have a question for anyone on the panel. I also have a little microphone which allows Connor to be able to hear what's being asked as well. So when I hand you the microphone, I'll also hand you a little mic. You've got two mics.
Aren't you lucky? Jane Searland from ACU, well known to many of us. I wait for your 2 microphones, Tim.
Just talking to that one.
Thanks, Archbishop, and thank you, panel. As always, to hear the different stories is encouraging, enlightening and empowering, so thank you. My question relates to a show that was on very late last night on SBS called Australian Walls, and it's a series of shows about truth-telling in the Australian context. And what I took away from that last night was the fact that our ancestors were warriors.
Yeah.
And part of the truth-telling that hasn't been told are the frontier conflicts and the wars. And they estimated that perhaps up to, I think it's 75,000 people, Aboriginal people, Indigenous people of our country, died during that process, and there's no way of confirming it except through oral history. So the question is, how would you see a way forward in truth-telling that very dark past, that tragic past for First Nations peoples? And I expect that would be a similar story for Canadian First Nations peoples, and also, Alfredo, for your peoples and your ancestors as well. Thank you.
Who would like to respond? Thelma, perhaps, or Connor?
Yes, look, certainly. Thank you, Jane. That was a fantastic question. And for those people who did actually watch last night's series, it went back to the Kalkadoon people and the Aranda people, which is certainly around my family and my father's country of Kalkadoon. And just watching and feeling country, and obviously the hurt and pain that went on, but I was proud as a Kalkadoon, while you were a Wakagudju, Wakamana woman, knowing full fact that my ancestors gave it everything to still have our existence here today, and that we can still talk on that today. And for our laws and our customary rights to country and for country is still alive. Not having met Rachel, but having same customary laws in that space, it gave me a sense of hope that collectively we could do this together. And I'm just doing a series now with Ray Martin on my country of telling the truth about my people was hanged, and they call it the hanging tree. My mother, my grandmother, we had to bury those bones of our people underneath the hanging tree. That chain on that hanging tree is still there. For us, and our healing is a big part of who we are. Our healing provides us the strength so we can keep on continuing to tell the truth of what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Selma. Connor, there were, I presume, frontier wars in Canada with the Indigenous peoples there?
Yes, we had very similar. Where tens of thousands were slaughtered, I guess, basically, is what it came down to. But a big thing, like Thelma was saying, a big thing is they fought for us.
Yeah.
That we are a strong peoples. We are very much connected to the lands and everything that inhabits them. And that's, I think, the big disconnect, and you mentioned it earlier, Archbishop, where, the Western world doesn't really connect with that silence that First Nations people do. And it's more than, the lands were quiet. It's that we have that connection to spirit that a lot of Westerners, their minds are too busy to listen. And that is what helps us remain strong and grounded.
Well said. We have another question down the back. If you could stand up, it might help us to see you and hear you.
Hi, my name is Sandra King. I'm also known as Honey Sandra. I'm an elder within our community, but I also see that I do have elders, and I'd like to acknowledge Ginny Phillips here. She's here too, so thank you for today. I much appreciate it. I'm the Reconciliation Action Plan Coordinator, which is a mouthful with the Anglican Church in Southern Queensland. So, thank you for your speeches today. Truth-telling is so important. A lot of it is oral history, a lot of it is living history and documented history. This year and last year, I think it was also, a horrific founding happened in Canada, with finding the children in British Columbia schools. I just wanted to know how your communities are dealing with that trauma of finding. Obviously, it may not have been documented, and we're still finding evidence of what has happened through our past. And it's such an horrific story, and I think it touched everybody throughout the world. So I just wanted to know how, Connor and Alfredo, how are your communities handling that trauma?
Thanks, Sandra. Connie, you might start by responding in any way you choose, and then I'll pass to Alfredo.
Sure. Thank you very much for that question. Because it is very important, with, first off, these children were stolen from their families to begin with. But a big thing, and we spoke a lot about language, but the big thing to start with is, these children, they weren't discoveries that the news like to use. They are recovered children. And I know ever since I was a little kid, mentioning that my grandparents went to residential school on Serpent River, I know I have ancestors there somewhere on the land. They were, bulldozed over, or whatever I think they had back in the day. But the children are there, and we've always known, and it's the government who has kept it quiet and kept it a secret. And all of these children, I think they're up to like 6,000 or 8,000 children that they've recovered so far. And there's lots more to go. They figure there's well over, 20 to 25,000 children that need to be recovered. So the healing ceremony, it's an ongoing process. And communities, not only in Canada, but I think across the world, because I'm sure that it's not unlike other places, that once the bodies of all the children have been found, then we as a people can continue that recovering. And all of these children live through these traumas, and yes, it's hard to talk about, And for me, as much as it's hard to speak about, my ancestors had to live through it. My family had to live through it. And for settlers in Canada, they have to hear it. And if my ancestors can, well, most of them survived that trauma and lived through it, and some did not, but the settlers can at least hear it.
Thanks very much, Connor. Alfredo, is there any word that you'd like to speak in response to that question?
Yeah, no, just to add that from a newcomer perspective or a new settler perspective, it is sad sometimes in Canada that the mainstream news don't make it to the ethnic, quote-unquote, ethnic communication channels and so on. So for the most part, newcomer communities will be immersed in trying to settle into the Canadian society, and they don't pay attention to what is happening around them, in particular what is happening with Indigenous peoples and Indigenous communities. Now, I don't want to give you the wrong impression that there isn't anybody who wasn't born in Canada who don't care about what is happening. Yes, there is a lot of people, and I know many of them, but I still think that is a lot more work needed for us to stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters from Turtle Island when it comes to that. We have similar stories, yes, and so we can support one another, but a lot more work needs to be done. And I want to thank you for your comment and the question as well, because it gives us hope to know that, as far as Australia, you heard about it. That's what is going to keep people, those who are responsible for, keeping the stories buried. That's what is going to make them accountable. We have to let them know we're watching you. We're watching you, and we'll continue to do so. So I want to just send Connor a hug.
Now, we have one more question, which will have to be the last, unfortunately.
Yes, good morning. My name is Sean Curie. I work for the Edmund Rice Centre, which for those in Australia, it's the Edmund Rice Centre for Justice and Community Education. Congratulations to Thelma and to Mark for this event this morning, which is very exciting as part of the ongoing series. In naming the Edmund Rice Centre, I think it's important to recognise Complicity, the organisation which I work for. It was sponsored by the Christian Brothers, which in the North American sense is the Irish Christian Brothers. So it would be inappropriate, I think, or lacking in transparency for me not to recognise the complicity of my organisation in the residential schools in Canada, not to mention everything else. And I mention that because of truth-telling. I think for us as church, it's important, but it's also a double-edged sword for us as far as telling our own truth. And Alfredo Barahona from El Salvador, we recognise that the United Nations General Assembly declared the date that Oscar Romero was murdered as the International Day for telling of truth about grave abuses of human rights. So that's the example for us as church, I think. My questions, I guess, is that if I look at the churches in North America on their websites, I see lists of those who have committed clerical or religious child sex abuse. And so a little bit of a question from your North American perspective, that's not something we do in Australia. Should we do that as part of truth-telling? Secondly, I guess from the Salvadoran context, there's two bishops in El Salvador, Alfredo Barahona with the last name Barahona, and as part of that divided church that Bishop Martin Barahona, formerly a Catholic priest, now an Anglican bishop, was on the side of truth-telling very much. Bishop Oscar Barahona from San Vicente, much more on the side of bishops who criticised Oscar Romero. So I'm wondering if you can tell us about the role of church in truth-telling, and especially Alfredo, recognising the work of Remy in Guatemala, if you've got some experience of that, where the church has been the key collector of information about the genocide of Indigenous people. Thanks.
Alfredo, do you have any reflection?
Sure. Yeah, again, no, thanks so much for the question, and also thank you so much for bringing the name of Oscar Romero to this room. Oscar Romero is somebody whose spirit always walks with me wherever I go. He did my confirmation when I was a young man.
It shows.
So I know very well what you're talking about in terms of the divisions within the church and also the criticism that he faced when he was still with us and continues to face. But I often said that families are diverse, right? Not everybody thinks and feels the same within a family. I just need to look at my own family to know that not all of us do the same. What is important, though, is respect at every level. Just because we don't agree with our point of view doesn't mean we have to kill each other, which is what they did to Oscar Romero. So I will continue to speak against that because that's not the way to do it. We may disagree. We have a right to disagree. But we have all obligation to respect one another, to honor life. That's what it comes down to. From a faith perspective, in my opinion, it comes down to honoring, the creation. I'm losing a little bit of the other points.
Remy in Guatemala?
Yes. I think, I'm very careful when I speak publicly and being recorded as well. Because words can be taken out of context. And I like to be very careful and very aware of what I'm going to say, because I don't want anyone taking my words out of context. The one thing I always tell people is I am very careful not to tell others what to do. But I'm more than happy to share my own experience, and I'm happy to share what works for me and what I'm doing. But I always tell people, because the question was also in relationship to what Australian should do, or the church in Australia. I'm very careful with that. Because you need to do what you need to do, what makes sense in your context, in your community. It is not for me or anybody else to tell you. As I said, I'm very happy to share my experience with you, but it is up to you who live here to figure out what makes sense for you. How is it going to work for you? That's probably all I can say. But yeah, no, I thank you for bringing the name and the spirit of Oscar Romero into this room.
Thank you, Alfredo. Connor, I wonder, would you like to speak a final word to the gathering?
Sure. Thank you very much, Archbishop. The whole purpose of us being here is truth-telling. And I'm sure the Indigenous ways there is the same as here, is that to walk a good path in life, we have to speak our truth. We have to be true to ourselves and be true to each other. And I will leave you with those final thoughts.
Thanks so much, Connor. I'm going to ask Alfredo to give us a final word, but in song. I mentioned earlier that music is an essential part of who he is and what he does. So lo and behold, a guitar, and lo and behold, the singer. Alfredo, we want to hear a song as your final word to the gathering.
Thanks so much for asking and inviting me to do this. It's very meaningful to me. This is who I am, and this is what I do, and this is what I've done all my life as well. So I'm going to share a song with you that Oscar Romero was very much part of it, because he actually commissioned this music to be written so we could sing it in Mass. So it is my honor to sing this with you. Basically, it's just saying, holy, holy is our Lord, who walks with us and accompanies us in all of our struggles. Is the only patron, it's the only Lord, and it announces our liberation. So that's what the song is about. Santo, 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 santo es nuestro Dios, Señor de toda la tierra. Santo, santo es nuestro Dios. Santo, 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 santo es nuestro Dios, Señor de toda la historia. Santo, santo es nuestro Dios, que acompaña a nuestro pueblo, que vive nuestras luchas del universo entero, el único Señor. Benditos los que en su nombre el Evangelio anuncian, la buena y gran noticia de la liberación. I also want to thank Cynthia for doing all of this. Cynthia is always in the back, but she's a big part of it. Cynthia, this is for you.
Thank you.
Santo, 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 santo es nuestro Dios, Señor de toda la historia. Santo, santo es nuestro Dios. Santo, 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 santo es nuestro Dios, Señor de toda la historia. Santo, santo es nuestro Dios, que acompaña a nuestro pueblo, que vive nuestras luchas del universo entero, el único Señor. Benditos los que en su nombre el Evangelio anuncian, la buena y gran noticia de la liberación.
Thank you very, very much, Alfredo. But I really do want to say, on behalf of everyone here, thank you to our three guests, to our own Thelma, who is so many things to so many people, and we've seen why that is so here this morning. So to you, Thelma, thank you so much. To you, Alfredo, thank you for your presence, for your words, and your song. And Connor, it would have been much better to have you with us in person, but it wasn't possible, but we've had you here online, and what a gift that has been to all of us. So Connor, thank you very, very much for being with us. Now, Alfredo has already thanked Cynthia, but it falls to me to make a more formal act of gratitude to Cynthia and all of those who have worked hard to put this moment together. It doesn't just happen, obviously. So I do want to thank Cynthia and the team at Evangelisation Brisbane. I want to thank everyone at ACU who has been part of shaping this session. So to everyone who has been part of enabling this latest session of the Laurel Glow series, I say thank you very sincerely.
Thank you so much.
And I think on that note, I notice Eric is poised with the microphone close to his lips. But I think it is time for morning tea, is it not, Eric Robertson? So, do you want to make an announcement?
Yes, just letting everyone know the ACU student ambassadors will be serving the food, so if people would like to head out through the door and line up where the plates are, that's probably the best way we'll work through before coming back for the blanket exercise for those that are joining us. Thank you, Archbishop.
Thank you, everyone. Do not line up where the plates are not.
Hey, Connor, we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Connor.
Adios. Emma, for deliver I think it might be out. Thank you. Well done. See you soon, Connor.
Congrats.